We're going to start our lunch session off with Senator Brophy McGee, who not only is, of course, the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee in the Senate, and is not only here with us, but lobbied the Senate president to get here, to hold the show up a little bit in the Capitol. The president turned around and said, well, hey, take my security detail. Here's a car. Why don't we run you up to State Reform, and we'll have you back here by 1 o'clock. So without any further ado, let's welcome Senator Brophy McGee to the stage. Senator. Thank you very much for being here. I know you got a lot going on. Hand you that. Why don't we just start, Senator? There's a lot we could talk about, but I want to sort of ask this simple question of what are you spending your mental energy and focus on in the last 24 hours and maybe the next 24 hours as this legislative session really becomes tense?
So I'm actually filming a bit part for Fugitive 2, and I convinced the Senate president. No, I just was saying I got to leave. I got to run and do this very quickly. And is there any chance I could get a ride? So I'm very grateful. The last 2 weeks have been very stressful. As you know, we're 130 days into our 100-day session, which started the second week in January. I call it the justifiable homicide period. Absolutely no one will convict any of us. And obviously our elbows are a little sharper than usual. And it's difficult because we're trying to put together a budget. We have a slim Republican majority in the House, 31-29, and they are sticking together like glue in lockstep. Yeah. Very, very conservative caucus. They're ready to roll on a budget. And in the Senate, it's a little different story. So there's been a lot of hurry up and wait, and you kind of wear down, but I think the thought is we have some incredible budget surplus and some important initiatives that we need to continue to fund, healthcare, of course, being one. And so I think people are hanging in to make that happen.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it is, without passing judgment on policy outcomes, it is thrilling as somebody who believes in our institutions of our democracy, of our Republican democracy, to see somebody holding out on principle for thousands and thousands and thousands of children. So I just admire all of the scars you must be taking, or the beating you must be taking. Tell us how that has played out, that you're with advocates, with the governor, with the other chamber, as you have sort of advocated for kids' care to be part of this budget. How has that played out in your view?
Well, first of all, let me first say what an incredible, incredible honor it is to serve the citizens of Arizona as chair of the Health and Human Services Committee. It's an incredible honor, and that responsibility deserves the best you can give. And I have to give a shout out to my vice chair, Heather Carter, Senator Heather Carter, and to my counterparts in the House, Representative Nancy Bartow and Representative Jay Lawrence. There's a lot at stake, but I can tell you, without jinxing it, that we got kids' care in there, and it's in there the right way. So check that box and move on to the next. We are fighting as we speak, and I don't know how that will come out, but we're fighting for GME. And it's a heck of a fight, and I'm not certain how that will come out. There's some very important policy bills that are teed up to vote on in the House that need to move. And I'm not sure that they'll move if this is the end of session, I'm not sure they'll move, but we need to build on the reforms and successes we were able to achieve this session. And I have to give a shout out because we have confirmed Jamie Snyder as the Access Director, and I was very proud to be the committee chairman to nominate her and put her before the Senate, and she passed unanimously.
Yeah, good. How would you compare, stepping back for a minute from the tactical and the line items of the budget at the end game, how would you compare this 130 days to other sessions in your legislative career? Put this one in some context.
It's so funny because this is my 9th year in the legislature. I spent 6 years in the House. This is my 3rd year in the Senate. And some old timer down there said, yeah, when you've seen one session, you've seen one session. Every single one is different. Every single one has their personality. And it's not like liking one kid better than the other kid, but some are more difficult to deal with, and it just takes a lot more work. And then you have the easy kids. Please don't tell my sons I said that. But this session has been tough. It's been more partisan than I would expect. There's some kind of no-brainer type things that have run afoul of individuals who have tried to stop them, like Kids Care. And so it's been more of a fight, but there's so many good things that are worth fighting for. One of the things that I'm working on is funding for the developmentally disabled workforce. And we have some workforce reforms. Again, they've not been voted out, having to do with licensing and streamlining requirements. We have some incredible, incredible challenges ahead of us. And while there is money in the budget for DD, EPD, Altex, it's not enough. And it was my #1 priority, and we got a lot. But given the Prop 206 issues and our lagging rates, we need to do more. So one of the things that I'm looking for going forward is an interim work group, and I think there are probably some folks in the room here who need to be on that, to really comprehensively address all those workforce issues and come up with a package and recommendations for 2020. And that's a #1 priority, assuming we can make it through this budget.
You had some stark, pointed comments about the budget the governor came to the legislature with. How have you found the relations between the legislature generally and the governor as this process has moved forward?
I think the governor's budget was actually okay. It had some things in it that didn't have some things in it that we needed. But then there was a Senate budget that was introduced several weeks ago, and I said it was the worst budget I've seen since 2015. The budget that's been published now and that they've worked on with less transparency than I would like, but is much better. But there's more that needs doing. I guess we're at the part of session where 4-letter words are technical terms. You just have to lower your head and keep fighting, and that's what I'm determined to do.
Yeah. How would you characterize sort of the sentiment inside the caucus during caucus meetings? That's a world no one gets a window into unless you're a member or senior staff person. Is it exhaustion? Is it exhaustion and vitriol? Is it sort of people feeling like within the Senate Republican caucus that it's time to work together and get this sorted out and get done and go home? Or how would you characterize it?
The difference between the Senate and the House is monumental. And you actually can dial up caucus meetings on, if you're bored and can't sleep, go up and dial up caucus meetings or committee meetings, and you can watch archived meetings. So again, Democrats and the Republicans in the House have marshaled their caucuses, however you say that, very strictly. And they stick together and move as one and stay together. The Republican caucus is very conservative. The Democratic caucus is very, is pretty progressive. And so it's hard to meet in the middle. But it's important to remember that on good policy, you're going to get 60-0 votes. I sponsored reforms to the adult protective system, adult protective services, that were pretty consequential, and it went out of the House 60-0. So you'll find those sweet spots, those contentious places, those places where everybody agrees something needs to be done. But when it comes to building a budget with hundreds and hundreds of expenditures for various items, you get it to where you like it, and 5 people over across the way don't like it. So it's a real push-pull. It's very complex. It's 3D Tetris. You have to come up with that sweet spot. And we do have some holdouts in the Senate on specific policy issues, and we have some folks in the House who are threatening to walk. There is a bill I think I might as well address now since I have the forum. The 31 Republicans in the House and a number in the Senate signed a bill to establish a pilot program for abortion prevention or alternative services, and driven by a very highly powerful special interest group. That was going to go in one of the budget bills. And I said no. Take it out of the budget bills, because if you put that policy and if you put that policy and that money in, it will just be a poison pill for the entire Democratic caucus. So they made it a separate bill, and I may wind up having to vote for it. But the point is, I wanted to create a runway for my Democratic friends in the House and the Senate. If they saw their way clear on one of those budget bills, I like this bill, we've done good things, and I want to vote for it, I can vote for it because it's not contaminated. And I've really pushed to keep the poison pill policies that couldn't get through on their own out of those budget bills. The last thing I would say about it, and I'm sorry I'm going on so long.
No, please, you get to go on as long as you want.
If you are a rural legislator, Republican, Democrat, Independent, you should be knocking people over to get to your chair and push the yes button. This is an incredible budget for our rural communities here in Arizona. It is unbelievable. It's the best budget I've ever seen. So I don't think the votes will go down that way. But you look at the urban-rural divide, the rural guys made out great.
So tell us more about that. See how you might apply it in healthcare or just generally. Why do you make that argument?
First of all, there are a lot of infrastructure projects. I'm sure, and it relates to that. If you're driving up I-17 that on the weekends or trying to, that project is in there, but there's also water infrastructure. There is pregnancy care for hard-to-access areas. There are some really nice programs, little and big, specific to healthcare, specific to infrastructure, and kind of community way of life. It's a very, very rich package for our rural legislators.
Mm-hmm. On the GME question, my understanding is that the rural piece may have a little more traction than the urban piece. Is that how, I guess, bring us up to speed on how you think that might play out, that $20 million
And I don't want to speak for my friend Heather Carter because this is primarily her fight. But there are several pieces in that. There's obviously, I think it's either $8 or $11 million for the U of A Medical School for physician positions. But the piece that I hear from everybody, no matter which side of the aisle, no matter House or Senate, is they love the GME piece, which was originally 15, I think, for the big boys and 5 for the rurals, or backwards. So we're trying to keep that 75, 25 and get that amount in. I think that would be huge in terms of reversing and beginning to reverse the physician shortage that we have.
Yeah. One of the sort of primary tasks of a legislator or any sort of legislative body, which is not at the end of session, but maybe throughout, is sort of oversight of the agencies. And when it comes to healthcare, the various managed care organizations and the managed care infrastructure is a central part of delivering, obviously, services in Medicaid. Stepping back from the end game of the legislature, as a chair, how would you say you feel like the managed care structure of Medicaid is working? Do you feel like MCOs are delivering on the promise of integration, that the providers are doing a great job managing or working within tight budgets? From a policymaker and a budget writer, how would you characterize the managed care system?
I would describe our managed care system as a model, and I would also describe it as incredibly complicated. Very few, if any, legislators understand it. I think my great gift is to be able to know who I go to and who to ask. Obviously, the integration of behavioral health with medical care and a follow-up with the housing component for seriously mentally ill. All of those issues are in play down there. One of the things that I'm grateful for as Health and Human Services Chair, I've always focused on human services. It is healthcare is kind of the comet, I always say, and the human services aspects are like the comet trail. You cannot provide good medical treatment to an opioid addict and then send them out to go live back under their bush and rob and steal to support, to get food. You have to support them and get them into that type of care. So what I'm seeing with the legislation we have down there, whether it makes it out or not, is more and more legislators are keyed in on putting that whole package together. I'm super excited about it. I'm not sure what's going to make it out and what isn't, but I think we're on the right trail. One other thing that I can talk about, and again, that bill is still sitting in rules, and I'm really super nervous, is that with the DCS population, they have been exploring I introduced legislation on their behalf to move the behavioral health component into CMDP. For all the things that have been wrong over the years within CPS and DCS, one of the things that has always worked is CMDP, the medical care for these kiddos. So to combine that with the behavioral health for these kids, I think it would be an enormous policy achievement, and if we are able to implement it, get the policy passed, and then implement it, I think that would be a huge step forward for these kids who are in the state's care. So those are the types of things we key in and focus in on. I think my advice to all of you as experts is to continue to reach out to and educate your legislators, because I don't think they understand how stinking complicated what you do is and how thin the margins are, and all the things that you have to put together, and they don't. So I would really encourage you to educate and advocate.
That may answer my last question. I know we got to let you go so you can get back to the Capitol, but I want to ask this anyway, which is, how can these folks help you do your job? How can they sort of put wind in your sails one way or the other?
So assuming we get out, and assuming we all survive one another, we're going to have an interim period where we have the opportunity to prepare policy initiatives and legislation for the next session. I know I'm going to be looking at that workforce issue very closely, and hope to have some of my colleagues on the Health and Human Services Committee work on that with me. So I would reach out to your members that you know on Health and Human Services and who are in the legislature, and if you have policy initiatives that you think you should bring forward as organizations or as healthcare experts, human services experts, be part of that. I saw Kathy Busby was here. So Secretary Hoffman, for instance, is starting the school safety task force, and I think we're going to recruit Kathy to be part of that because we really need to dig into our schools and look at the mental health issues there. And that could hopefully produce legislation next year to really key in. It's not just the facilities in schools that are having difficulty or that we need to be cognizant of and are sure that are safe. It's what's going on inside a student's head and a student's heart. We're having problems. I used to be on Washington Elementary School Board. That's a K-8 district. And I was talking to the superintendent the other day. They are dealing with younger and younger kids. The example he gave me, a third grader with suicidal ideations. We have enormous behavioral health issues. We have enormous problems from the opioid epidemic. All of those are going to need our continued attention and policy response. And it is imperative that you tell us how it's implementing. We need to know. We can't. Gone is the day where you pass a law and walk away and dust your hands and say, well, got that done. We have to know how it's being implemented and what needs fixing. This is the most incredible community, the healthcare and human services community, at reaching out and saying, you know what, this isn't quite working. How about we try this? And just keep doing what you're doing and engage your legislators like any good mom would know when nothing much is going on. Because if you go down and try and talk to them today or when session is on, it's very difficult. Engage them, teach them, bring them up to date, and understand that this isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. It is Arizona. And you are just the people to do that. This is such a phenomenal, phenomenal community to work with. And I am so honored.
A discussion on health policy and justifiable homicide with Senator Brophy McGee. Let's give her a round of applause. Senator, thank you.